Hello, this is Alan Wheeler with an online video chat for my college English classes that are online and may not have the classroom experience. So if you've come across this on YouTube, there's no need to click like or make comments or subscribe. There's no intention to go viral here. It's just an aid for my students. This first video chat is something that I do in my face-to-face classes called Writing to the World. And it comes basically from the St. Martin's Handbook and uh, based on some of my experiences in China as well. And the first idea, when we think about writing to a multicultural world and establishing common ground with all kinds of diverse people, is we need to think about what seems normal. And so I've got a little memory aid here. And thinking about what seems normal would be similar to culture shock or entering a new experience like marriage or going to college for the first time, when the things that seemed ordinary are suddenly challenged. And so we should, as writers, we should think about our assumptions and the things that seem normal. So an example would be when a newlywed couple begins to wash the dishes, and one wants to use a towel, and one wants to put the wet dishes on a drying rack, and suddenly they never imagined this was anything that could be a conflict, because in their families it was just assumed. That's the way that we wash dishes. Another maybe more startling example was that when China hosted the Olympics in 2008, and they anticipated crowds coming from Europe and America and all kinds of other countries, they actually had smile training for the greeters and the workers for the Olympics, because traditionally being expressive and showing emotion on the face was not a Chinese quality, not something to be admired or expected. So they actually measured the smiles and trained the workers to smile more and be more expressive. Something we wouldn't think about if we only lived in our hometown our whole lives. So the idea here is to be flexible and anticipate differences in the audience you may be writing to in the world today. Another thing is to be careful of is to account for individual differences, because not everybody in a culture will be the same. There are some Chinese people who smile a lot, and so we don't want to make broad stereotypes or overgeneralizations as we practice this. The second thing the handbook suggests is to clarify meaning. And I'll return to my example from marriage again, as I do in the face-to-face classes. And I've read some books on marriage communication and things that talk about reflective listening. And so it's good to, when you have the opportunity to research your audience or ask for feedback. Teachers will ask students, "What did you hear me say?" And in a good marriage, you may ask your spouse or partner, "Is this what I heard you say?" And to reflect and feedback and clarify through the conversations. And so this is something we can do as we're communicating. The next things I want to mention do focus more on the writing aspect, and that is that one thing we need to think about is what authority is expected from the writer, and this may be different from culture to culture. I always ask my students, do you think in a college English class you're expected to to write with authority and to maintain a strong perspective or argument? And usually most of the students answer yes, and that's true. And a lot of college English instructors will tell students, don't write I think, I believe, in my opinion, but to take a strong stand and to make the argument more directly. And so that is the case in our Western culture, that the writer should take authority, but that's not always true. And so in some cultures, traditionally in China, for example, they will appeal to the masters, those who have come before, and approach the reader with much greater humility than we would tend to do in the West. So that's something to think about. The next one is more about audience expectations. Audience expectations, what your reader expects. And so in a teacher-centered classroom, more responsibility would be on the teacher to provide the scaffolding, instructions, and things. In the student-centered classroom of the modern West, the student has more responsibility. Let me give you an analogy from the marketplace. There's an idea called buyer beware, which means in some cultures, it's the customer's responsibility not to be cheated. And I think in the West we have more of an idea of the seller needs to be transparent and honest. And if there's some kind of theft or cheating going on, then we would blame the seller, I think, more. And this is very different in some cultures. So that's just one example of what's expected. Plagiarism is another good example that you can get in a lot of trouble in Western universities using ideas from others without giving credit, whereas in some cultures it's more expected to borrow from the masters, and maybe just a blanket credit at the end of the paper would be enough in some cultures. Not true in college here in the United States. So be careful of that. The next thing to think about, I'll put three here together. We'll talk about evidence first, evidence, organization, and style. And again, what kind of evidence is going to be more persuasive will depend on the culture. And we're very fact-based, scientific in the West. And so if there's studies or data that can support an argument, that's much more persuasive for us today than emotion, I think. And in some cultures, the appeal to credibility or building trust will be more of a focus, so that there's a story called Dead Man's Path, in which the modern school teacher did not show respect for a pathway where the departing spirits were supposed to travel. And he lost all respect of the community because he did not honor that religious, that spiritual part of their culture. So while that may not carry a lot of weight in some cultures it might be very important to build trust in that way. So for our purposes, of course, you want to use support and specific examples, quotes, research, and things like that to persuade. But that's not always the case. For organization, we like a very clear 5-paragraph structure in a lot of college English classes. A very clear organization with signposts, transition, moving from point to point. Of course, that's not true in literature. That's not true in all cultures that do a more circular kind of reasoning, where there's a central point, but there's digressions and stories, and things are more indirect, perhaps, in those cultures. Similarly, style in English today, in college English in particular, we like very direct communication, stating the thesis at the end of the introduction, and not implying indirectly, especially the main idea in the paper. And you need to find out, does your instructor permit informal usage? Most instructors would not want slang and using the first names of authors in the text. Some instructors do not want contractions and other kinds of informality. But to wrap it all up, house style rules, what the instructor is asking for, or your supervisor at work, is what you want to be aware of, and to, if you're addressing a broad audience of, like at a college today with students from different countries and instructors from different cultures, you want to be careful of all these things and be aware as you are writing to the world. I want to end with just a little chart that I often share with my face-to-face classes. And these are 3 big differences between the United States culture and the Chinese culture. And because I taught there for several years, I have some personal experience with these differences, and it might highlight this idea of intercultural communication, diversity, and writing to the world. The first big difference is that we tend in the United States to focus on the individual, whereas in China there's a focus on the group. And I'll give an example. When I went to McDonald's with my Chinese students in China, because there's McDonald's in every major city in China, we'd go there, and just as in America, French fries would be served in little individual cartons. And we'd bring the food back to the table, and the first thing the Chinese students would do is pour those individual cartons into one big pile in the middle of the table and begin sharing together and eating them all together. And that's a big difference. That's an eating custom based on the group rather than the individual. And that difference translates into so many aspects of our cultures. We tend to base things more on merit and esteem of the individual in America, whereas it's more based on honor, face, and shame. And so in China, to motivate a worker, a boss would openly shame that worker and in front of the other employees. That worker would feel motivated, would feel that even the boss cared. And a teacher who corrects students in the Chinese classroom is one who cares about those students and is motivating those students. That's something we tend not to do in our more self-esteem based culture. In the West, we would praise the students. Bosses would tend to give awards for merit and individual achievement in the American companies. Another thing that this affects is the businesses. When in America, they tend to put the task first. They sign the contract first, and then they might go out to a party or a meal. In China, the relationship comes first, and they'll have a big banquet and show great hospitality first, build the relationship, and then worry about the details of the contract later. So that's a very different expectation. Quickly now, there's also a difference in American culture. We focus on equality and egalitarianism, and all people are created equal. In Asia, there tends to be a focus on rank and power distance, so that there's at the front of the Chinese classroom, there's always a platform that the teacher stands on, and the president of the country or the university is always shown more respect and honor, and it's less likely to call your boss by the first name in Asian culture and things like that. Much more formality arises from that difference. And then the last one here, directness versus indirectness. And I'll close this with a little bit of a funny story, in that we tend to be very direct. If the answer is no in America, if a store doesn't have a product or something, they say, no, we don't have that here. And it's more impolite to say no. It's again that relationship-based culture, that hospitality-based culture. And so I went to buy an alarm clock in China at a little store, and they didn't have alarm clocks, and rather than saying no, the vendor told me perhaps tomorrow. And if I had been savvy and known the Chinese culture, I would have translated that to mean no way. We don't have, nor will we ever have, alarm clocks. But being American and new in China, I kept coming back. I came back the next day, and again he said perhaps tomorrow. Probably as I left, he was shaking his head. Doesn't he understand the word no? And I came back again and again, perhaps tomorrow, until finally one of my students explained to me perhaps meant no way. So that was a cultural difference, and we can apply these to our writing in this modern, intercultural, international world that we live in. Thank you very much, and hope this helps you with your assignments.